You know, there are a lot of videos on the internet showing people how to use detailing clay to clay their car's paint. But this is a fresh video on detailing clay, and I'm going to do what I call a brain dump, which is something that I do in all my detailing classes, just covering different topics and techniques. Basically, it means I'm going to take everything I know and just kind of share it with everybody that's in the class, in this case, a video. So this is a fresh video on how to use a bar of detailing clay, Mike Phillips style. So before we get started, on some of the background information, I need to clay this into a patty. So I'm going to share a couple techniques right up front. First of all, there's a lot of clay on the market. This is a fine grade and this is a medium grade. You can also find ultra fine and you can also find aggressive clay bars. So there's a lot of different options to choose from. You know, pick anything from an established brand, you'll probably be good to go. This is actually a fairly large clay bar. I think this is 200 grams. And you could clay this into a patty and use it, but you really don't need a big thick patty. You just need a patty. So to save some money and get more use or more bang for my buck, I'm just gonna take a pair of scissors, and this is the fine clay bar. I'm just gonna cut this in half. You could use a knife. Heck, you can use a chainsaw if that's your thing. But you know, it's just a way to kind of save some money, get more bang for your buck by dividing that clay up. Plus, you know, if you were to form the complete clay bar into a patty and then drop it on the ground, you just wasted that complete bar of clay. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out of the cellophane wrapper here. And then I'm gonna knead this into a patty, kind of like a pancake. Okay, and the way I do this, I got a couple different ways I like to show people, but one of the first things I like to do is I just like to start twisting it like taffy. And this just kind of fold it over, twist it, and this just kind of gets it warmed up and gets it out of that bar mold that it's in. Then I'm gonna put it between my hands like this. I'm gonna pull my fingers together. I'm gonna squish together and spin my hands, and it's gonna get the patty started. And I call this the Hulk technique. Now, a lot of you wrestling fans know Hulk Hogan. That's one of the Hulks. And a lot of you people that follow comics know the Hulk, the green superhero. Either one is fine, but here's the thing. The Hulk technique is you want to take and put this between your hand, push really hard and twist, and then when you're doing this, you got to make the sound. You know, because both Hulks do that kind of sound. Anyway, I've got my patty started. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my thumb and my index finger. I'm going to start molding this into a patty about the size of a pancake. And you want this thing to be about 4 or 5 inches across so it fits over the width of your fingers as you're pushing down, so you have a good footprint as you're claying. Okay, so let me go ahead and get this thing kneaded out. And just real quickly, I just want to give credit to the inventor of detailing clay. And I hope I don't butcher his name. I've never met the man, but I've heard great things about him. But his name is Kodate-san. He's an engineer from Japan, and he invented this back in 1987. So it's been around a long time. He was also inducted into the IDA, that's the International Detailing Association Hall of Fame, back in 2023, because I don't know of a single detailer that knows their stuff that doesn't know about detailing clay. And it's important to understand that detailing clay really changed the way we do things. So let me share how and why. Before detailing clay came along, if you had a contaminant on the paint, like overspray paint, tree sap mist, some sort of industrial fallout, the normal process to remove that would be to compound it, because remember, clay didn't exist. So here's the thing about that though. When you compound the surface, you're gonna remove the contaminants, but you're also gonna take off perfectly good paint. So it's a waste of paint. And as most of you know that have been following me online for years, is I always try to share with people just how thin the factory paint is on modern cars. It's usually less than 2 mils. Now, a Post-it note is around 3 mils. So hold a Post-it note between your fingers. Your brain will go, wow, that's really thin. Then extrapolate that out to car paint. The clear coat's actually thinner than a Post-it note. So that's why clay helps to save the paint, because instead of taking paint off while you're taking the contaminants off with some sort of compound or polish, you're just going to be gliding this clay bar over the surface and it's going to mechanically abrade or mechanically remove the contaminants. But that's how they did it in the old days. They would compound or use a polish and then some sort of polisher, whether it's a rotary polisher with a wool pad or a foam pad on an orbital polisher. Quite frankly, I've always found that using a foam pad on any brand of orbital polisher is very ineffective because typically the foam will just kind of glide over the contaminants. But a wool pad on a rotary polisher with an aggressive compound, look, if it's taking paint off, it's taking everything that's on the paint off. So yes, that would work. But again, you're back to taking off paint needlessly, as I like to say. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history about clay. And I've got this just about kneaded so it'll fit across the palm of my hand here, my 4 fingers here. And here's a little tip. Whenever you're using this, don't put your fingers right on the face of the clay pad, because what's going to happen is you naturally put more pressure on your fingertips and you'll push 4 holes through it. Then you got to stop and re-knead. So what you want to do is you want to put your clay just in your hand, but put your fingertips past the clay patty like that. That's the proper technique. Okay, so let me get some clay lube here and we'll go to work here. Okay, so now I want to also talk about not just how clay works. By the way, this is called prep wash. Okay, so most people would use a clay lube and that works perfectly fine. This is something that Jim at Dr. Beasley's came up with for me to do waterless washes on cars. And what's unique about it is it doesn't add anything. It doesn't add any carnauba, no graphene, no ceramic. All it does is get the surface clean, because most of the waterless washes on the market add something. And usually when I'm using a waterless wash, it's because I'm getting ready to buff out the car. I don't want to add anything. I just want to get the paint clean. So Jim invented this, but it also works great. You want to spray a little bit on the face there as a clay lube. Okay. So I'm going to put this in my hand. Now let me explain not only how this works, but why you want to use this. Okay, so the primary reason we clay paint is because a lot of times there's some sort of bonded surface contamination on the paint. And one of the ways you can test for this is to use what's called the baggie test. And let me just leave this here. I forgot to show that in the beginning, but I'll show it right now. So here's just some simple baggies. After you wash and dry the car, take your hand, put it inside the baggie, and basically what you're gonna do is you just wanna take and feel the paint. And oh wow, a lot of times you'll feel like these little bumps everywhere. By the way, this is a 1978 Camaro. It is completely contaminated. It's here for an upcoming class I have where we're going to be teaching paint correction and ceramic coatings. But that's kind of a side point. But that's how you would test, is put your hand in a baggie. If you do this for money, okay, you're a professional detailer, then here's a tip. One of the things you can do to show your customers you really know your stuff is to fill the paint on their car first to see how contaminated it is. Then you do the baggie test. And then once you've kind of know in your head that it's really contaminated, then ask them to fill the paint. And a lot of times their eyes will get real big and wide because they're gonna go, what the heck is on my paint? And you'll explain, well, it's some sort of contamination that was in the air. Okay. So as you saw, all I'm doing is I'm just taking this clay, I put some lube down and I'm rubbing it back and forth. I'm not putting too much pressure, but I'm adding probably a couple pounds is all. And one of the reasons why is because this paint is really contaminated. And of course, I want to get all the contaminations off before we start doing paint correction. But after you clay a section, then what you're going to do is just wipe off the residue and then you can move to a new section. So the way you use the clay is first do the baggie test, see if you need to clay the paint. In most cases, if a car is a year or two old, especially if it's a daily driver parked outside, it's gonna have some form of contamination on it. And washing doesn't remove it. The bond between the contaminant and the paint is so tight that washing doesn't remove it. That's why you wanna do the baggie test after you wash it to really see what's going on at the surface level. But the next thing you do is you form your clay into a patty, and let me see if you can see all the gunk we're pulling off here. Okay, it's pretty dirty. I'll take a close-up of this and try to share it in a video later on, but it's pretty dirty just for that one section there. But you want to spray down your clay lube, form your clay into a patty, and then rub it. And usually what you want to do is you just want to rub in straight lines. Now, I've seen people make the argument that if the product's not scratching the paint, it doesn't matter which way you move your hand. But just as a practice, I would always rub in straight lines, either the direction or the length of the wind blows over the car when you're driving the car, or whatever fits the panel. Sometimes you have a thinner panel. It wouldn't make any sense to go across it in a short way. You just go the direction of the length of the panel. And light pressure, and then when you're done finished claying that section, you have this level of contamination. At that point, you'd want to take and fold this into itself and knead it to expose some fresh clay. I'm not going to do that yet because I want to talk about something related to that. Now, here's why you want a clay paint. So I think we'd all agree when it comes to a glossy paint car, so not a matte finish or a satin finish or a frost finish, but anything that's got glossy paint, I think we would all agree that a great looking finish is a glossy looking finish. Okay, when you get contamination on the paint, it creates surface texture that diminishes gloss. So one of the primary reasons that a professional detailer or an enthusiast would want to clay their paint if they find it's contaminated is to restore a smooth surface, because that's going to restore a glossy surface. Now, another reason to use detailing clay is because anytime you're going to put an LSP on the paint, so an LSP could be like a old school carnauba wax, a synthetic paint sealant, or a ceramic coating. Whatever your choice of LSP might be, the chemist that made that product, actually, if they're a good chemist, they formulated it to bond to urethane paint, okay? They didn't formulate it to bond to the gunk that's on the paint. So one of the most common questions I've received all my life is, when you're talking about a certain wax or a certain sealant or a certain coating, the question is, how long will that last? Well, the first part of answering that question is, how long anything will last depends on how the surface is prepared to accept it. So by claying the paint, removing the contamination, you get it down to pure paint. And now whatever your choice of LSP is, it has the best chance of making a proper bond. So it lasts a long time, and that equates to protecting for a long time. And in some cases, it also means look good for a long time, if it's a quality product. So it preps the paint for the LSP. Now, another thing you want to do is you want to remove the contamination, because you don't want any of this contamination coming off in the buffing process. And the argument is it could cause scratching of the paint. I don't know if I've ever really seen that. It's just a good practice, if you feel contamination on the paint, to go ahead and remove it instead of buffing it, mixing it into the buffing action between the pad, the product, and the paint, and be scouring the paint with whatever junk you pulled off. So it's just a good best practice to remove any contamination before you start machine polishing. Now, typically, the surfaces that are going to be the most contaminated are the horizontal surfaces, and that's because whatever's in the air will tend to land on it and then form a bond. But you can also have contaminants on the vertical surfaces, like the fenders and the doors. Imagine something that's sticky, like overspray paint or tree sap mist is sticky, and the wind's blowing. If it blows it to the side of the car, it's going to stick. So don't just think that all contamination is on the horizontal surface. It can also be on the sides of the car. So a baggie test will tell you which panels are contaminated. But I myself and most professional detailers I know, if you're going to do the paint correction on a car and you find the top surfaces that are contaminated, you're going to clay all the panels. You just want to get in, get it done right, and also just get it over so you can move on to the next step. So that's why you want to clay paint, is it restores a smooth surface. Gloss comes from a smooth surface. It enables whatever your choice of LSP is to make a proper bond, so it lasts a long time, thus it protects a long time, and it'll look good. And then, of course, just to recap, the way you use this, and I'm going to go ahead and get this back panel before I knead this, and I'm going to talk about kneading. So again, put a little bit of lube down. I'm going to put a little bit onto the clay itself, and then come back and just make a back and forth motion. Now, one thing I want to say about this is, as I start to rub this clay over this section that hasn't been clayed yet, I can feel the clay kind of grab the paint. I feel it actually grab. If it was even any more contaminated, it actually stopped my hand. It's so contaminated. But as you clay, you start to pull those contaminants off, or you abrade those contaminants off, and then you notice the clay starts to glide effortlessly. That's an indicator to you that that area is decontaminated, and it's time to go ahead and wipe that section off and move on to a new territory. Now, on the topic of how clay works, this is interesting. I know there's some confusion about this, but a lot of people think that clay works because it's tacky, it's sticky, so it's pulling the contaminants off. I've seen this shared in videos and written in articles for years now, that the way clay works is it's tacky or sticky, so it pulls stuff off. But that's not technically correct. What clay is it's a synthetic form of putty or clay. Think of a synthetic form of Play-Doh. You know, we all played with that when we were kids. Only inside the clay is a pulverized abrasive, okay? So as you're rubbing this over the surface, it isn't pulling everything off. It's actually, think of sanding. It's abrading or sanding the contaminants down flat until the clay comes into contact with the paint itself and it starts to glide again effortlessly. So that's how it works. It doesn't pull things off, it abrades things off. And thus the reason you can buy ultrafine, fine, medium, and aggressive clay bars. The more aggressive they are, the larger the volume of the abrasives that are found in the clay. The less aggressive they are, probably the less abrasive, or the less quantity, and maybe even the less aggressiveness of the particles themselves, these pulverized abrasive particles. But that's how it works. Now, because it is sticky, as you abrade it off, it does stick onto the clay, but it's not a sticking action, it's an abrading action. And then at some point, as you can see, you'll have so much gunk built up on the surface of the clay that you want to either flip it over to the other side, or at this point, fold it into itself and re-knead it. I don't want to do this because I want to save and take a picture of this to show you just how bad one half of the roof on this Camaro was. I got another piece back here. Let me go ahead and knead this out. Anyway, so then I also want to talk about things you can do to get more use out of your clay. Now, I know most people aren't going to do this, but if you wanted to, after you clay that surface, you could take this over to the sink, put a little bit of even just like gentle hand soap, massage it and rinse it, and you'll actually pull a lot of that gunk off. You won't get everything, but you get a lot off. But the benefit to that is then you're not folding and kneading 100% of the gunk that you removed off back into the clay bar. So you'll get more life out of the clay bar. And let's talk about how long you can use a piece of clay before you should throw it away. There is no test that'll tell you if the clay is, so full you need to throw it away. What you got to use is something that is kind of rare nowadays. It's called common sense. Look at the clay. If it looks so contaminated that you're worried it might actually scratch the paint with the contaminants that are embedded or embodied in the clay, then throw it away. It takes hours to buff out a car and only seconds to put a scratch in because your clay is contaminated. And on that topic, let's talk about dropping your clay. If you were to drop that clay onto the ground, even though the floor in here is very clean, chances are really good you're going to pick up some sort of sharp, abrasive, pokey particle. And if you don't need that into the inner part of the clay and you start rubbing over the paint, you're going to put scratches everywhere and your car's finished. So just a good general rule of thumb is once you drop it, it's game over. Throw it away, replace it with a fresh piece of clay. And I just would add to that I've actually taught classes where the training car was an employee at LAX, the Los Angeles airport. And every time those big old jets take off, they dump a lot of fuel out on the takeoff, more than when they're just flying. And that lands on all the cars that are parked around there. So if you work there, every single time a plane takes off, it's dumping jet exhaust onto everything out there, including your car. When we clayed a car that had been parked at the LA airport with a piece of clay, when we were done claying the car, it was time to throw that clay away. It was so contaminated. Now, if you got a car that's a garage queen, but it's got some contamination on, you'll probably get more life out of the clay because you're not gonna be filling it up so fast. You're gonna be loading it up full of contaminants because there's not that many contaminants on the paint to start with. And when we talk about how often to clay your car, there also is no standard reply. I mean, I have some people say once a year, twice a year, every 2 years. But reality is how often you should clay your car depends upon the results of the baggie test. I could clay and polish out this car to perfection, park it outside, and on that particular day, someone is painting maybe a building down the road or nearby. That paint drifts into the air and lands on that car, and I've got to clay the car again. So it's not a matter of like an oil change every 3,000 miles. It's more of a matter of what's in the air over your car. And again, that's where you do the baggie test. Now, hopefully after you clay and polish out a car, the next day it's not contaminated, but worse things have happened. That I think is all. I have some notes here, clay the same thing. So we talked about how in the old days they used compound, but clay removes the need to use a compound because it just takes the paint off needlessly. Clay leaves the actual paint on the car. It just takes the contaminants off. So it's a much safer option. And then let me just kind of talk real briefly about clay substitutes. So a few years back, these clay substitutes showed up, and what they are is a polymerized rubber with pulverized abrasives in them. So it's the same concept. The primary difference is if you drop one of these clay substitutes, like a clay pad, a clay mitt, or a clay disc for machine decontamination, you could rinse it off and reuse it. Or with the clay, of course, you'd want to throw it away. When it comes to storing it, I'm going to pull my little box of baggies up here. Sometimes clay comes in a plastic case, and the idea being is once you use it, put it back in the case to store it and keep it clean. The problem with that is it usually sticks so hard to the plastic on the inside of the case that when you go to pull it out, a lot of it stays behind. So it just wastes the clay. And I know a lot of people say, well, Mike, spray some clay lube in there and then it will stick. But you know, it's going to dry up. It's going to stick. You know what actually works better? It's just a simple sandwich baggie. You can use a Ziploc, or this is just a full top. And what you'd want to do is take your clay lube, in this case it's Dr. Beasley's Prep Wash, spray a little bit in there, maybe put a little bit onto the clay patty itself so it's moist, and then just place this in the baggie, fold the top over, and it's ready to store until you want to use it again. So that's how I would store it. I'd use a clay baggie, not the case it came in. Try it yourself. I think you'll find I'm right. Other than that, the only other thing I can really do the brain dump on is over the years, people have oftentimes asked me, if I don't have clay lube, could I just mix up some soapy water in a spray bottle? And the answer to that is yes, you can. Just the primary difference between a quality clay lube, or in this case, this Prep Wash, and soapy water is like this product and most of your spray detailers, they're meant to, after application and spreading, when you wipe off, to leave a nice, clear, shiny finish. Now, if you use soapy water, and I know some of you professionals will agree with me, what happens is you spray that on a clay, it works just fine, but when you go to wipe it off, it doesn't wipe off like a spray detailer or a clay lube, and now you see streaks and smears and smudges everywhere. So not a big deal if the next step is going to do paint correction, but if you're an enthusiast and you're just going to clay your car, you don't want to be seeing all these smears and soapy water residue everywhere. So just stick with a quality product that's actually formulated for the job at hand. And then maybe one other thing I can include in this is some of the products that are out there market really do a good job of lubricating the surface. And one thing you want to avoid is you don't want too much lubrication because it'll impede the abrasives from doing their job, abrading the action. So you kind of need to find that balance. And that's why a properly formulated clay lube or a water wash will tend to work better than a lot of other options that are out there on the market. I think that's pretty much all I got. I'm looking at my notes. Everything's there. And that's how you use a clay bar. This car, by the way, is here for a class coming up. It's next weekend. I know this video will live on for eternity onto YouTube. But this is just one of 3 cars for our 3-day class. And if you've never seen any of the pictures or videos from the classes that we teach, one of the things we do instead of using demo hoods is we bring in the real deal. This thing is really hacked up. It's going to make a great training experience for the students, but I'm only going to clay this side and the students are going to actually clay the rest of the car. So I don't want to go any further because I don't want to rob them of the pleasure, as I like to say. Anyway, that's how you use a clay bar. It's pretty simple. If you've never done it before, the most important things I can share with you is to first wash and dry the car, get any loose dirt, any loose dust off the finish so you don't grind that into the paint as you're claying, and then use plenty of clay lube and just take your time and divide larger panels like this roof into smaller sections. It's possible maybe I could clay a whole half, but I'd be a lot more efficient if I were to divide this into 4 sections. Here's a section, here's a section, there's a section, there's a section. And then when you're moving to a new section, overlap a little bit into the previous section to make sure you remove all the contaminants off that surface. Once you knock out the roof, move to the other horizontal surfaces, the hood, the trunk lid, and then tackle the vertical sides. And also keep this in mind. If you do the baggie test, let me just show that again. If you do the baggie test after washing and drying your car and you feel contaminants on the paint, okay? So there's nothing really here. This is smooth. I just clayed it. Once I come over here, whoa, that is so bad. Maybe you can hear it. It's really bad. But if there are contaminants on the horizontal panels of the paint or the vertical panels, chances are really good you're also going to find that up on the glass. Oh man, I can feel it on the glass. And the reason why is because the contaminants in the air, be it overspray paint, industrial fallout, iron particles, tree sap mist, whatever it might be, it's not picky where it lands. If it's in the air, it's going down at some point and landing. So that means the entire exterior of your car potentially could be contaminated. Not too much of a problem when it's smooth paint, plastic, or glass, things you can clay. The real problem gets into things like pebble texture or plastic. I mean, if you found overspray paint on your hood and your door, it's probably on the pebble texture plastic, but you can't clay pebble texture plastic. So usually you got to find a chemical alternative to remove anything like that. Anyway, I hope this video helped you. And if you ever have any questions, I'm always easy to find. You can reach out to me. My email is mike@drbeasleys.com. And I'm always happy to share my personal cell if you got questions for your own detailing project. And that's 760-515-0444. And if you want any information about any of our upcoming detailing classes, go up to drbeasleys.com. There's a link up there that says classes. Click on it and it'll show you the dates, the location, the prices, and also an in-depth read on the topics, okay? So you can get all the information you need. And I hope to see you at a future detailing class.